Hi everyone, welcome to this week's video. My name's Catherine and I am a flower grower here in the Scottish Borders. We've had quite a mild winter so far. We haven't had too much snow or ice or frost. We've had more rain and gale force winds, but it has had dry periods as well. Over the last week we've been battered a little bit by some gale force winds with Storm Malik and Storm Corrie, but we've managed to come away unscathed in the garden quite well this time. We've got some hardy annuals that have survived outside over the winter that I can show you. We have got some bulbs that are starting to come up. We've got some snowdrops out, some hellebores. So let's go and have a look around the garden and see what it's looking like and what I've been doing. So here we are in the back garden, and this time of year it's all about cleaning things up, tidying up. So we're going to have patio slabs to clean, paths to clear, beds to weed and mulch and get ready for the new growing season ahead, so that we're all ready to go by the time things are wanting to start flowering. I'm going to have to tie in thin branches into climbing roses on the frames that have maybe come loose. So I've got one here that's blown down in the wind, so I'm going to need to go and tie that back into its frame. Up here in the flower patch, lots of weeding to do, and we'll come and have a closer look in here a bit later today. Down in the front garden, there's no grass to cut at this time of year, but there's plenty to do in both of the flower patches on either side of the lawn. So down here in this part of the garden, I have been doing a lot of weeding, starting to get the beds prepped. There's still quite a lot more work to be done down here. Been cutting back the hellebore leaves so that the new growth can come through and you can start to see some of the flower buds now. And some of the tulips are also starting to peep up through the ground. And the ones, if you remember, we made some bulb lasagnas as well. The bulbs are starting to come up in those as well. So it's not going to be too long until we have some flowers, depending on how the rest of our winter goes. So last week I did start on weeding out this flower bed. I've still got a lot to do, and we've got quite a lot of debris blown into the beds from the recent gales that we've had. So I've been able to get out some days and work in the ground. It hasn't been frozen, so that's been really good, but some days it's just been so wild that I haven't been able to get outside, and I've had to do some indoor jobs instead. But next week hopefully I'll be able to do a little bit more outside in the garden. I really love hellebores in the garden. They're so pretty at a time of year when there's not much else flowering, and later on when they have mature seed pods, they are fantastic to use in wedding flowers and in vases. And at the moment I've just been tidying up the old leaves, cutting them away from around the base of the plants so that there's room for the new growth to come through and you'll be able to see the buds and flowers more clearly. Last year I did a video on caring for your hellebores, and I had some tips on there about what to do with them at this time of year. So if you'd like to find out more about these lovely plants in your garden, then have a look back on my videos from last year and check out the hellebore one. And look, all my hellebores are in bud except this one here. It's an early flowering one and it's just beautiful. Really nice to see something flowering in early February in the garden. Here we've got a lot of my irises coming through now. They seem to be growing really well. These are actually bulbs I planted last year, so I'm really interested to know how well they will flower for me this year as a second time. Here we've got some honesty coming through in the garden. This will provide me with early flowers in April, May that I can mix with my tulips and narcissi in arrangements. So now down in the other flower patch we can see my overwintered cornflowers, and some years I can get these through the winter and no problem, and they flower really well for me in late May, early June, and other years they just don't survive at all. It just depends on the kind of winter we've had. But so far these are looking good, and these are all plants that I sowed from seed back in August and September and then planted out in the garden, and I haven't covered them in anything. These cornflowers have been out with no horticultural fleece on them and they've survived very well. Here we've got the first tulips just breaking through the soil now. Last year I had big problems with tulip fire, so I haven't planted as many tulips this year, and I haven't planted them back in the same bed that last year's were in, because you can't plant tulip bulbs where there was tulip fire for 3 years. So this year I have planted a few in different beds in the garden, and I have also planted some in pots so that I can move them inside or outside the greenhouse depending on what weather we have got. And these are coming along very nicely. We've got some nice pots here filled with apricot beauty tulips, which shall look really pretty in some of my wedding flowers in April. So far they're doing really well, the tulips in the pots, and I think I'm going to do more of this in years to come because it is much better to have them in things that I can move around according to the weather, because in Scotland we just don't know what we're getting, and if I am providing flowers to florists or for wedding flowers, then you need them to be reliable and coming into bloom at a particular time. And also, if I grow tulips in pots rather than in massive volumes in beds, it means that if one set of tulips gets tulip fire in a pot, then it won't spread to the other one. So I might not lose as many as if I had them all in a bed and it just spread from one set of tulips to the next. And this is just amazing. This is an anemone that is flowering in one of the pots outside the greenhouse, and it seems to have withstanded the gales that we've had and the cold weather, and it's flowering away. So I have just the one, but it's very pretty to look at. Over the winter months we have been working on our compost, so I have been putting a lot of the material that I've been cutting down from the spent flowers into the compost base. I've been chopping it up so it's quite small pieces so it'll decompose quicker, and we've been turning the compost heap and bagging up the compost that is ready for going on the beds, and you can see here that we've got some lovely compost ready. So once I've done all my bed prep and I've weeded all the beds, I will be mulching them with this compost ready to plant into in the springtime. And if you want to find out more about making compost, I made a video earlier in the year about how my 3-bay system works for making compost, and you can find lots of tips there. So up here in the top flower patch I have got some horticultural fleece on some beds, and underneath the fleece is my anemones and ranunculus that I've got planted, and I've also got some overwintered hardy annuals under there, so there is some nigella under there and some daucus as well, and that just helps give them a little bit of a head start and protects them from the worst of the winter weather, so we should get some early spring flowers there. I spent quite a lot of time up here last week weeding out all the beds, and they were looking really good. I have got to go back around again and remove some of the debris that is flowing in onto the beds after the latest storm, so I'll do that next week and then they'll be ready for mulching. One of the plants that does really well for me in the garden is feverfew. It's an absolutely fantastic filler flower for bouquets, and it's really easy to grow from seed as well. These are plants that I have had in the ground and flowered 1 year already, so they'll do another year for me. Sometimes they start to get woody after you've had them in the ground a few years, so I replace them then with new plants that I've grown from seed. But it is a really easy one to grow. I've got lots of new little seedling plants that I'll show you next week when we're in the greenhouse. It's a tough little plant as well. It seems to overwinter really well outside without any protection from horticultural fleece. It's nice to see some of the herbs are putting on some new growth for next year. So this is bronze fennel that's just starting to show some foliage, and also we've got some lemon balm in the garden that I have seen coming through now. I think this mild winter is really bringing things on a lot earlier than I would normally see them putting on growth in the garden. So here is another look at the flower beds. I've got some bulbs coming up there. There's some alliums in that bed and some irises that'll be coming up. Feverfew in the background, and over here is a perennial bed. So I've got all sorts of nice perennials that are used for cutting. So this is some geum here, which is putting on some new growth and looking really good. And beside that we've got some aquilegia coming through, and it's a tough plant. It does really well in Scotland as well. And beside that again, here's some more geum. And we've got some astrantia. I really like astrantia. It does really well for me. And it's just starting to put on some growth. You can see the new leaves there. Here's some acacia, or yarrow as it's also known. And that flowers really well for bouquets throughout the summer. I'm trying to increase the volume of plants that I have, and I planted quite a lot from seed in the autumn. And these are overwintering in the greenhouse, which I can show you next week. First signs of some growth on the ernagium here, so that's really nice to discover in the garden today. And here's some ravenswing. It's looking really good this year. I'm hoping it'll give me lots of lovely stems of filler flowers to use in bouquets. It's a really great May flower for me. And over here we've got some perennial cornflowers. These will be a lovely blue colour, and these will come out in late May, early June for me as well. No gardens complete at this time of year without the snowdrops, and they're just starting to really get going in the garden just now, and they look absolutely beautiful. A Scottish garden this time of year isn't complete either without some winter flowering heather, and this is just starting to flower just now. I wonder what you've got flowering in your gardens this February. Hasn't it been so nice having a look at these snowdrops, and hellebores are coming out in the garden now. It's always exciting when you see the first flowers because you know that you're getting through the winter by that stage. And also I really love having a look at the perennials and just walking around the garden and seeing if there's any signs of new growth on them after the winter. It means we're not that far away from seeing our flowers again. So next week my plan was to show you around the greenhouse because we've got lots going on in there. So I've got my hardy annuals that I sowed from seed in August and September. We'll have a look and see how they're getting on. We'll have a look at some sweet peas. I've started some new batches of sweet peas off from seed in the last couple of weeks, and then we've got the sweet peas that we sowed in the autumn, so we can compare the two of those. And I'm also doing a few experiments. So some seeds like to be cold in the fridge before you sow them, so I've been having an experiment and putting some seeds in the fridge for a couple of weeks before I sow, and I have had others of the same variety that I haven't put in the fridge, and I've started them off at the same time to see which ones give me better germination, so we can have a look at that as well. And also I've been pre-sprouting more ranunculus and anemones. So I did some in the autumn and they are out under the fleece in the garden, and I have been succession sowing new batches now after Christmas time, so that I'll have anemones and ranunculus hopefully flowering for a longer time period. So we'll see how those are getting on as well. So lots to look forward to next week, so I hope you can join me then.